Chapter 21, Wild Indigo, August 1856. James cleaned the ashes out of the fireplace. These have been promising since June, his mother reminded him. Rebecca slept hunched in the rocker, still weak after her bout with fever. Seemed like everyone was sick. They had it over at the Macons, and even Governor Robinson, who was pro-slavers, said wasn't the governor, was down with it. In town, people were whispering, cholera, and talking about the epidemic that swept through here not 10 years before, wiping out whites, Negroes, and Indians alike. But the runty doctor only said, these got nothing to stew about, folks. Believe me, I'm the product of Harvard Medical College. It's just a simple egg going around. He gave everyone quinine and told them to sleep and sweat it away. Tonight, when he'd come to check on Rebecca, he'd said, she's out of the woods, she's over the crest, which are idioms, meaning she's not going to die. Ma said, praise the good Lord. Yes, sir, the child's come through the dark of the night. She's turned the corner. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I tell thee, that quinine's a miracle drug. Wish I had the patent. I know thee has many calls to make tonight, and that sweet baby to get home to, Ma said, urging him toward the door. She never mentioned the wild indigo tea, but he was barely out on the road when Miss Lisbeth said with a snort, quinine my left elbow. It was the roots that did it. Now Ma and Miss Lisbeth sat at the table working on Lisbeth's reading. She labored with writing the letters because she was left-handed, and Ma could only show her how to work the right-handed way. It gave James a hearty satisfaction to see Miss Lisbeth struggling. I'll never get it, Miss Weaver. Nonsense, Ma said, and stood up behind her and tried to guide her hand. Maybe this is why thee has such a struggle sewing, Ma said with a sigh. Should never have been G's invented, Miss Lisbeth muttered. Caden, sit down on the floor. Too fancy and curly to write. James stuck his head back into the chimney and felt drops. It's raining. I sure can't sweep up wet ashes. Work quickly before they turn to mud, Ma said, and save every bit of ash, son, because I'll be leaching it in the fall and using the lye to make my soap. In Boston, they'd bought soap, fragrant as violets. Out here, Mrs. Macon was teaching Ma to make her own soap. A brown crock stood at the back of the stove, and into it went every drop of fat that Ma could save. James couldn't imagine washing in anything made from ashes and lard. How do you get clean when you smell like a pig? The rain better stop, Miss Lisbeth said, because I'm going on tonight. James bumped his head on the stone in excitement. Finally, he looked up and saw Ma's disapproving eyes. It's threatening a storm, child. Miss Lisbeth slammed her copybook shut. I have to leave tonight. Folks are expecting me. Thee will catch thy death, Ma said, flattening the copybook open again. Now watch here, thy O's must be as round as tiny moons. The minute it gets dark, Miss Lisbeth said. My rucksack's all packed. I urge thee to reconsider. She shook her head. There's good moonlight to guide me, Miss Weaver. Trusting the storm doesn't cover it up. And by the time I get those folks down to Missouri, there will be only a sliver of moon, so our trip back here will be safe. But Lisbeth, amen, she said firmly. It wasn't just one wagon or two, it was a whole train of them that James watched come over the hill, looking like they'd fall headfirst into a ravine. So when you see a bit of a space between paragraphs, that means some time has passed. Their white covers billowed in the Kansas wind like sails on an open sea. In fact, folks were calling these wagons prairie schooners, and they were heading right for the middle of town so that it looked like a big sea of white boats, but it's a wagon train. You've heard about that before. Mm-hmm. It's a bunch of wagons going west on the Oregon Trail. And they were headed right for the middle of town. James walked alongside the wagons and the beat-up-looking oxen that pulled them. Plumb in the middle of Massachusetts Street, the lead wagon stopped, all the others waiting behind like obedient ducklings. People began to tumble out of the wagons, stretching and yawning and turning their faces toward the sun. A rumpled-looking man bumped right into James. Lord, I've never expected to stop in such a pretty town. It's just about the Garden of Eden. I expect thee's been traveling a good long while if thee thinks that. Thee? What are you, a Bible person? Quaker, sir. We're friends. Well, sure we're friends. Molly, hun, come over here and meet my new young friend. Molly waddled around from the other side of the wagon. She proved to be a woman fixing to burst. That means she's pregnant. James figured Lawrence would be adding one more name to its rolls before the day was out. You got a doctor here? Molly growled. Over there. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Olney and Dr. Robinson both, but Dr. Robinson's usually away on government business. Best you be going for Dr. Olney, the woman said, holding on to her heaving belly. Heart pounding, James ran for Dr. Olney's house. Dr. Olney, sir, there's a woman over by the hotel who's about to foal. You better come. James led the doctor through a maze of wagons to Molly, who was as pale as the cover on the wagon and clutching its ropes. Dr. Olney helped her up to the wagon, and they disappeared inside while Molly's husband paced. I may look old, but I sure never had a baby before, he told James. Molly, she's a good sport. She wanted to come along for the ride to Oregon, so I married her proper after 50-some years as a bachelor. So he's 50-something, and he's having his first child. James meant to listen as the man who called himself Jed Pryor revealed 50 years of his personal history, but James's attention was drawn to the house across the street, Bethany Maxwell's house. Mr. Maxwell propped his door open and began carrying out trunks and boxes and barrels. One trip, he had 100-pound sack flour flung over his back like a dead body, and he was loading everything onto one of the wagons. And then Bethany came out, her cat curled in her arms. Oh, hello, James Weaver. Is thy pot leaving? All of us, she said morosely. She buried her face in the black fur of the cat. James swallowed around the lump the size of a goose egg. My mother says no more. No more warring. No more bleeding Kansas. No more flooding. No more lightning and thunder. Where's he going? James asked, thunderstruck by himself by how Bethany Maxwell's hair was just the color of the cat's fur and her eyes like early dusk. My Uncle Lewis has come for us from Cincinnati. We're following the Oregon Trail. Oh, these bound for adventure, James said bravely. But it's clear over the other side of the mountains, and I can't take Trembles. You must keep him for me. She thrust the cat into James's arms. He's an outside cat. He won't scratch at your door or anything rude like that. Trembles scurried out of James' grasp and wound himself around Bethany's leg. She tried to ignore him. We're sleeping in the wagon tonight and leaving at first light. She picked up a small satchel her father had left on the porch. I can't take much. What was he supposed to say? Certainly not, I'm going to shrivel up and die without thee, though he suspected he might do that. I'll remember you, James, over on the other side of the mountain, because I never met anybody who said thee and thy before. Well, I can say you and your. No, don't. Now, take Trembles, or I'll cry right here on the street. She slid away from the cat, and James grabbed him up and ran home. It wasn't until he was inside with Trembles that he wondered just what kind of baby Molly and Jed Pryor would be taking the rest of the way on the Oregon Trail.